Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first session. It's so lovely to see people out of Rainy Street for an 8 a.m. session on leadership. Thank you so much for coming. Our topic this morning is EM leadership emerging from the pandemic. My name is Leigh Patterson. I'm going to be proctoring this session. Our speakers today have no disclosures to share. As some of folks say, we aspire to disclosures. Our objectives today are really focused on what has the pandemic done to leadership in multiple areas of academic emergency medicine, focusing on the challenges that we face that are different or moderated by the pandemic, strategies to address these. A lot of focus our panel wants to share today on communication and messaging, and we'll talk some about development opportunities for leaders that can help us manage these new challenges. I want to share with you who all is speaking with us today. Dr. Lawson is the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education and Student Affairs at VCU. Dr. Ralph Riviello is the Professor and Chair at UT San Antonio. Dr. Amy Kaji is Professor of Clinical Medicine at Harbor UCLA and will be talking about several different leadership roles. And Dr. Cassandra Bradby as the Residency Program Director at ECU and our incoming President of ADIEM. My name, as I said, is Leigh Patterson. I'm the chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at ECU. So we're going to start with a couple of questions to our panel to let them share their thoughts on some different roles, and then we'll open up to questions from the group. So for each one of you, and maybe we'll start at the far end and walk in, if you would introduce your leadership role that you accepted during the pandemic and talk about, if you don't mind, why you accepted the role and if that decision was different than other decisions you've made about leadership roles and responsibilities.
Sure. So I accepted the role as chair of emergency medicine at UT Health San Antonio. I had been the chair of emergency medicine at an academic community program in the Philadelphia suburbs. And in the short time I was there, they converted us from a hospital employee to contract management group employees. And, you know, of course, the party line was, oh, it's the same. We're just, you know, you're going to get the same everything, and we're just moving you over. And it quickly was apparent that it wasn't the same, and it made the chair's job more challenging, and really wasn't what I, signed up for. So went ahead and started applying to different chair positions. And this one happened to work out. So how was it different? Clearly this was a more academic program. So there was a lot more layers of that kind of administration, but also the hospital was not part of the university. It was a separate county hospital that we staffed. So it was a longstanding academic partnership, but once again, now it was two separate bosses, the dean and all of the administrative aspects of the school, and then all of the administrative aspects of the hospital.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lawson, Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education, and I think in sort of thinking about what the change was for me, so as moving from an institution where I was a curricular dean, I really probably had not thought about moving positions at that point in time. I'd been in numerous different positions, really everything from the clerkship director to sort of overseeing the clinical curriculum, to overseeing the entirety of the curriculum and sort of help lead through an LCME accreditation visit, and actually was in a pretty good place. Our LCME accreditation visit was actually scheduled for essentially about the week the pandemic started, and so that got pushed back. And so I really hadn't thought about leaving at that point in time until I actually found myself in the midst of the pandemic with a completely new leadership team and finding myself doing all sorts of things that were not initially in my job description, not things that really I'd anticipated doing. I mean, I was the person who was actually sent out to find N95 masks for the students and working with the supply chain management to figure out how we were going to get these in various places for learners. And it wasn't until really, I think at some point I was like, wow, I'm doing all of these job things that I think that maybe leadership should be doing. Maybe I should think about other opportunities, and really giving me, I think, some confidence to think about looking at other activities and other roles and ways in which I might grow my career as part of that process.
Hello, my name's Amy Kaji. I'm from Harbor UCLA. We are affiliated with UCLA, but we like to call ourselves the ugly stepchild because we are one of the county facilities associated with it. And so we often don't get all the perks of being at UCLA. Until March of 2020, I was executive vice chair. And March of 2020, when the pandemic hit, our chair stepped down. And he asked me to be the chair, and no one else had been asked, and I felt obligated to take this position. No one else wanted it, and I didn't particularly want it at the time. In fact, this is my mentor, and I said, don't you think you could wait for maybe like 2 to 3 years? I am SAEM president-elect, and I have many roles to fulfill, so I felt under a lot of pressure. Plus, I didn't realize what I was getting into with the pandemic. I also had never taken on a chair type of position except for the executive vice chair. And I was extremely nervous about taking it and protecting my faculty and my residents. We used to use things like bandanas and things like that, or recycle our N95 masks, as well as surgical masks because of the short supply. And, we were told that that was okay from hospital administration. And it was hard to balance the messaging from hospital administration to what I felt was scientifically valid and sharing with my faculty and residents whom I really wanted to protect. And I think that sums it up mostly.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Cassandra Bradby. I'm the Residency Program Director at ECU Health. I became the Program Director 6 months before the pandemic started. And I can honestly say that I was not planning to become the Program Director when I became the Program Director. I actually had met with Dr. Patterson 36 hours before that and said, hey, I actually think I would like a sweet gig in student affairs. And then 36 hours later, I was like, I think I'm going to be the program director out of necessity. And so stepping into that role at the beginning of a recruitment season was a little overwhelming, but it was cool. Like, I can do this. We've been recruited. I've done this for like 7 years. I can do this recruitment season. Made it through that. And then I got smacked with a site visit. Program director change, all that kind of good stuff. So I got a site visit in February. Good times, went well, no problem. Site visitor was delightful as they possibly get. So I think I've gone right over the hump, right? And I'm kind of coming into my own to some degree. I kind of understand what my role is, and now I'm the bad guy, whereas I was the fun one before. So I think I figured it out. And then we got to March, and I don't know if you guys remember, but Cord was the week. It was the week right before everything went to trash. And actually, the super spreader event of the gentleman who spread COVID throughout New York City from Westchester was actually the weekend that Cord opened in New York City. And I was giving my first national lecture, by the way, at Cord that time. And so trying to figure that out, if I was going to get quarantined for my very first match, because that was what I was worried about, because that's 2 weeks before the match. And quarantine at that time was 2 weeks. I remember calling Dr. Patterson and being like, are you going to quarantine me? Because if you're going to quarantine me, I'll come home now. I was like, I cannot possibly miss my very first match. Like, this isn't going to go. She's like, it's going to be fine. I'm like, is it? And then we get home, and everything shut down, right? All of a sudden, conference had to be virtual. You couldn't congregate. We created a COVID unit. I got to figure out are the residents going to the COVID unit? What are they going to wear in the COVID unit? How do we intubate these patients? How do I educate you from a distance on things that you can't distance educate? Like, I can talk to you all day about how to do an LP. I cannot teach you the mechanical skills of how to do an LP on Zoom. We can try it, but it is not going to go well. And so trying to figure out how to do all that stuff virtually, plus I still need you to do the hands-on stuff, was really hard. And I think that was the hardest part for me in the pandemic is, one, the lack of togetherness for the residents, especially headed into July with brand new people to a brand new town, and trying to get them integrated into what it is we do, the community and where we live, and getting to know one another. And then the second thing was how to educate them in a very different way than we'd ever done it before. And I think now we've kind of settled into a groove with kind of hybrid virtual learning and whatnot. But at first, like 3 months was real interesting.
So lots of taking field promotions, which isn't uncommon in emergency medicine, but probably before the pandemic or during the pandemic, a little bit more challenging. Let's shift a little bit from sort of the stress of that to perhaps sharing a win that you might have had in your role as a leader and in one of these phases of the pandemic. I'm still calling it a phase right now, whether we're post-pandemic or we're just in the lull before the next. Either way, how about you share a win with us and the strategies that you used or a tactic you used to achieve success?
Yeah, so not a win, but related was that our 3 of my residents came back from New York and were the first healthcare workers in our hospital to have COVID. So that wasn't a very proud moment in my career as chair, but it came up with a lot of questions and how to quarantine and what to do. But I think one of my biggest wins was kind of twofold. One was we were able to not cut anybody, staff, faculty, residents, research staff, despite going into the pandemic with a budget projected because of all the shutdown of like a $60 million loss to the university. And I have to say our dean was very good at leading us through that. And we ended up only having a $20 million loss. So sounds like still a lot, but we were able to do it without any salary cuts. And several of the schools, even within the UT system, cut positions, cut hours. We still kept our ED staffed and that. So I think that was one of the big wins. And then I think the second big win came around, supporting the faculty. We were able to get our salary raises for the next fiscal year for our faculty because of where they were within the AAMC guidelines and below the 50th percentile. We were able to raise them up to that. But we were also able to recruit. We were short a few positions and, there was a hire freeze, but I was able to negotiate with the dean's office, the president's office, to allow me to hire at least 2 faculty positions. So I think those were some of the big wins because I think everybody was hearing it in the community and through all their chats and email trails of like this hospital, this school, cutting positions, cutting people, hours and all that. But we were able to keep everybody whole, at least for that 6 months that it existed here in Texas.
So I think I can remember back at those early days, and I can remember, and emergency medicine is so, I think, connected in so many ways with social media. And so as the things regarding COVID started coming out, I went to my leadership and I was like, hey, I think COVID is going to be a thing. We need to start contingency planning now. And they looked at me and scoffed and snorted. And then, of course, there we were some weeks later trying to make these plans. I really struggled in the beginning of COVID, especially when we were pulling students out, because I felt like it was a struggle with the moral and social contract that we have with patients. And so the balance between how do we keep students safe, but at the same time, we're telling the very people who want to go into healthcare that they shouldn't see patients, that they shouldn't be involved in it, was really sort of a struggle for me. And so I think that was really hard. I will say the good thing that came out of this is I had spent over a decade at this point in time of really trying to think about how we can change medical education. And I cannot tell you just the decades of frustration of we can't change this. Why change something that's not broken? And I'm like, it's broken. You just don't even see that it's broken. And the frustration with that. Well, COVID was the thing that really changed that and may have broken us on the other side of people with their change fatigue at this point. But people were all of a sudden willing to change. And I think one of the things that really supported that is getting those people to come together with a unified cause and then realizing that we had to work together, we had to continue to pivot. And so I was meeting with our course and clerkship directors on a weekly basis. We got together, we talked about how we were going to change this week. We kept track of all of the changes. And from week to week, we just pivoted to keep things going. with the plan of getting the students back in the space as quickly as possible so that they could actually provide patient care the moment that was lifted from the AAMC. So I think there was a tremendous amount of good that came out of that, and really helping people understand that we can change. We don't want to change a lot of times, but it really is possible to pivot on a moment's notice and be able to keep things going. And a lot of good, I think, did come out of that. Now it's trying to figure out what's the good and what's the bad, and how do we get the sweet spot.
So at Harbor UCLA, one thing that was apparent was when I walked into the job, they said that they needed the emergency department to function as the ICU for the entire hospital, because we were the only beds with monitors and isolation rooms, and we are a relatively new emergency department. That would mean that we wouldn't have a functional ED in our space that we were working with. And so we had to move our operations to a different location to actually see patients. And initially, my prior chair had refused. And, ultimately, I made the decision to go ahead and make our ED the ED ICU. And that did win over a lot of points from every single other department, and every single other department began to want to try to help us because we had no location to see our patients except for in the chairs and the hallways and things like that. And we implemented things such as the orthopedics department, or ENT or optho, taking patients not after they've been roomed in an emergency department, but they would see patients or take the patients once we've seen them in triage, and they would see them in their clinic. They would expedite that treatment, or they would take them in the cast room, and it was extremely helpful so that they never had to enter our emergency department. And I don't want to say post-pandemic, but with the crowding and the boarding after things had settled, we were able to implement the things that we had done previously that had gone away after the pandemic had effervesced, or whatever you want to say, and re-implement those. And we would always say, oh, that's a COVID silver lining. And so there is some collegiality that has remained interdepartmentally.
I think the biggest thing is everybody learned how to be more flexible. I mean, I think our specialty is probably one of the most flexible specialties because that's what we do. But being flexible about scheduling, being flexible about what's open and when it's open, thinking about, like, do I have to come to work today? Do I not have to come to work today? Because we shut down whole sections of the ED with, like, 24 hours notice. So you would get a phone call that's like, hey, don't come to work. We close that section of the ED. You're going to be first call for if someone calls out sick, you'll come in instead of sick call person because you were already supposed to be at work today. But everybody really banded together, and I think this sense of community was a bit stronger for like the first probably year of the pandemic. And everybody was very good about thinking about everybody else's family. What do folks need? Residents bringing in toilet paper for other residents, because I don't know if y'all remember, the toilet paper was gone. And so you would see like a 9-pack of toilet paper in the physician workroom because someone couldn't get any. And so seeing, how well everybody takes care of one another, I think was the biggest win from the pandemic. But a sidebar was we got lots of like great new technology. Like I know that like not everybody loves Zoom at this point, but we still do some Zoom conferencing every other week. And it's been really nice because you don't have to come all the way to work for conference for a lot of the lecture stuff. And the residents really appreciate that because they can still be with their families in the morning and things like that. So I think that part's also been really nice.
All right, thank you guys for sort of that introduction into some of our experiences as leaders in these phases of the pandemic. I'm going to open it up to the audience if you have questions. We can pass around a microphone, or I can repeat for the recording anyone's question.
Maybe it doesn't have necessarily completely to do with the pandemic, which sounds like it changed some things, but it sounds like everyone kind of was not looking for their job they have now, and then something happened, and then they kind of grabbed their job. So in those years before finding
So before pandemic serendipity hit, were you getting ready for what that might come, or were you really happy? Yeah.
So as the most junior faculty member, I wasn't 100% positive what I wanted to do. And I had just kind of decided that I was like, I do this recruitment thing. I think I'm pretty good with the students. I like teaching. I think I would be pretty good in student affairs. And I literally just decided, I think maybe that's the path I want to go, because I was like, I can't be the APD forever, but I really like being number 2 in charge. And so I kind of settled into that idea right before I became the program director. I think for the most part, like, I've always been somebody who is happy to do what needs to get done, like, for the betterment of the rest of us. So I think one of the things I have learned during the pandemic is to actually think about what I want and what matters to me, and how to think more about, like, how to promote myself in my own career. I will also say that watching what happened during the pandemic, I really don't want to be the dean. And I'm not positive I want to be a chair. But I think, it's been really interesting to see how all the jobs really morphed during this time, and kind of where they're going now. And so still trying to figure out what I want to do with my career. But so I hadn't 100% mapped it out, but I'm not sure this was 100% it either.
Yeah, so I was in Philly for 18 years, and when I moved from Drexel Hahnemann over to the community program, I thought that was fine, and I would just be there till, death, retirement, somebody murdered me, whatever happened, right? And then, 11 months later, get thrown the curveball and had to re-examine everything, and pick up and move halfway across the country, which was not on the list, and everything else. So. Am I happy now? Yes, I'm very happy in my role. We've done a lot in our department, but I don't think if you had asked me a year before the pandemic, or even when I still was going through it, was this what I envisioned for myself? No, because I had gotten the job I wanted and was very happy with where I was living, the area, closeness to family, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, this was a huge curveball. And then, throw the pandemic in when you show up as the new chair of a department with 30-some faculty members, and within 3.5 months, you didn't see them. You couldn't have, how do I evaluate people I haven't even met with, may not even have worked with yet? Well, by then I was working with people. But, those kind of things where it was very tough to try to figure it out.
So I would say that my career has been probably a series of field promotions. I would like to in some way think it was planned. However, I really in the beginning thought I was going to be a community physician, and I practiced in a community setting for about 4 years before I figured out that I was not happy at all in that role, and I just missed the teamwork and the collegiality. And so when my initial chair hired me back, I told him, I was like, I really want to be a clinical educator. I want nothing to do with research, and I absolutely want no administrative roles whatsoever. And then somehow I took a wrong turn. My first field promotion came when I was in Italy with a resident presenting a research project, and they're like, we need you to be the clerkship director. They started tomorrow. We need you to start tomorrow because they became suddenly ill and got intubated in the emergency department, and we need you to step into this role. So I think I knew things that I wanted to really be involved with learners, that I really like many of you all, fixing problems. And so I think I've really built my career on sort of seeing challenges. I think the downside of that is that sometimes you're not quite as strategic as you need to be, and really trying to be thoughtful about what is the strategy as opposed to just being the problem fixer. But when you're a problem fixer, people ask you to do more and more things. And so I think that's really probably how my career largely looked. I think I got a lot of my fulfillment from national involvement and really having an opportunity. And the last sort of the preceding phase of this was at a school that was one of the 11 original schools to get a large grant from the AMA. And so I feel like I was able to reinvent myself in different ways about every 4 or 5 years. So I was really content. I don't think I had decided what the next thing was going to be. We had an entirely new administration. And really it just focused on on LCME accreditation. So I really thought that next phase was going to be like figuring out what this new leadership pattern was going to be and what that was going to look like before, and then struggling probably a lot with imposter syndrome along the way too. And so it wasn't really until someone really actually said that you can do this job that really made a significant impact and really forced me to think about, okay, what do I really want to do and what are the opportunities?
Mine too was happenstance, and I just happened to be in that same location. By training, I did a research fellowship and disaster medicine fellowship and pursued my PhD in epidemiology. So my niche was really methods, and then to be thrown in a completely different direction in operations, which I had no experience with, was a complete fluke, but a very steep learning curve. And for sure, I had imposter syndrome. And it's interesting, I learned that I don't want to be chair. I'm so sorry, guys. But I don't want to be chair, and I'm trying to figure out my role and trying to figure out how to invigorate my research career and my methods and whatnot.
I'll take a stab at that too, if that's okay. So I also was, like Amy, not on that path. I was in education in the dean's office in faculty development and was deployed to 2 departments to serve as interim chair, including our home department. And I didn't want the job at first. I thought, and I really enjoyed the interim role. That's a completely different discussion about interim roles, and I really enjoyed the interim role. And unfortunately, the pandemic coincided with a failed search, and I wasn't kind of given that option. Just got to continue on, and here's the pandemic. And for somebody who wasn't from an operations background, there was nothing quite like it for operations education. And just, I mean, a deep immersion in how do we run a department? How do we make money? Where does our money go? What is the calendar for this? And I never wanted to know that. I never did, and I didn't think I would enjoy it or be good at it at all. And I know that if it weren't for the pandemic, I wouldn't do the job I do now, because I would have stepped back out. I would have gone back to my other role. I would not have discovered that I enjoy it and have some aptitude for it. That being said, I wouldn't wish the pandemic on it for that kind of education, but I really do have to acknowledge there's a lot of accidental happenstance with that. But I do think it's very interesting to hear how much the pandemic focused people. Is this what I want to do? Okay, do I know what I want to do, and what those opportunities are? But yeah, other questions from the audience? Oh, all right, we'll start there and we'll kind of work around. Yes, sir.
Wondering, maybe your teams, I think some of our teams is just exhausted at this point.
Yeah.
Wondering from a leadership perspective, how do you motivate hope going forward for your teams? Especially now after whatever stage of the phase we're in, where there was so much focus on mental health, well-being, burden, right? We've always used those words a lot. But how do we flip the script so much so that we're focusing on things that better emergency us when obviously we're faced with very, very big problems?
So how do we enter this next phase? How do we motivate? How do you motivate your teams and take your team forward next?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm not sure we have the right answer. I went into a job where the hospital did not like the emergency medicine department, and I think it was more personality of previous leadership, and that because there was a change once there was a change in leadership, and we really hadn't done anything yet. And then we got hit with the pandemic, and we really stepped up because, all the clinics were closed, our doors stayed open, we were doing and seeing patients that we probably didn't need to see, and all this other stuff. And the hospital really took notice. So I think that kind of helped reinvigorate folks. One of my medical director at the time was asked to be part of a large advertising campaign for the hospital. So she was on billboards and commercials and all of that for the health system. And folks were like, wow, like they would have never thought anybody from emergency medicine would have even been allowed to be in the newspaper, but here's big billboards all throughout San Antonio with her picture on it and about, leading us through the pandemic and that kind of stuff. And then it spilled over as we got some new people in and came with new ideas, and we once again reinvigorated our clinical space and changed some things. And we just talked about it, that we made a change to our fast track and put more physician involvement and physician oversight of it with the residents there instead of just a pure APP model. And we've now been seeing over 100 patients a day through our fast track when our previous historical totals were about 50 to 60. So people are now having competitions with each other, and we're happy to encourage that, to say like, oh, you had the most patients in that, fast track day. Here's, a pizza party. Here's some recognition. Here's an award for it. And now they're fighting with each other to have the best total, to say, well, you slowed me down that day, or you saw more than me because you kept pushing me out of the way, kind of friendly competition. And I think we've just really gained a lot of respect in the institution, and that's allowed our faculty to feel reinvigorated. And I think the big thing is, as a chair, and Dr. Patterson and Dr. Kaji could answer this the same way maybe, I find if you let people do with things that they want to do, even though to you they may sound crazy, and as long as there's not a huge financial impact to the department, I'm pretty okay with it. So we have a wilderness medicine elective, and like the students are, like, I have no desire to go out into the woods and mountains and try to make splints out of twigs and leaves and all that other stuff. Yet we have several faculty who go on this whole 3-day excursion with the students. It's a whole month-long rotation, and it's hugely popular. We have to turn students away from it and that. But if I had said no to that, I think a couple of my faculty wouldn't be as happy as they are. And then the nice thing about it is, at least for now here in Texas, the way education works, or higher education, when we do those kind of things like course development or run a course or a clerkship, we get dollars from the state, and they get converted into educational RVUs. So my faculty get that money back, or at least into their division, and they could use that for equipment, they could use it for shift buy down, and that. So I think that's a great way to incentivize them to do something they like, and then get money for it, and then take away some clinical shifts so that they're even more happy and more invigorated. So I don't think I did anything. I think it just was a natural progression, but those are kind of the wins. When you see them, kind of go for them.
Similar to Ralph's shop, ours was also not friendly to the emergency department, and thought as the kids who didn't play in the playground. And it was difficult, but certainly just with a little compromise that did help. And insofar as our own department, because hospital administration often said no to our requests, when we have our retreat, so for example, the year that we had a retreat finally in 2021, we said, okay, we can't have a retreat where we're just complaining that hospital admin won't give us this, this, and this, and this. Instead, we have to focus upon how we, within our department, could do something to help one another. So our department, although small, is compartmentalized, and there was a lot of siloization as to what education was doing, what research was doing, what operations was doing. And it was very helpful and a positive thing when we got together and we developed a plan on how we would meet more frequently intra-divisionally. And it has helped to actually restart social events with our faculty, because no one shows up to the office even now. And it's hard to interact and develop relationships. And the water cooler talk, where I used to really enjoy running into people so that I could bounce off ideas, and that doesn't happen anymore. So we've been trying to have a lunch after a faculty meeting and things like that.
I think I agree, like now being able to socialize has been helpful. Food trucks really go over well. Like I know that we're like past the like pizza parties make you happy thing, but like no, it low key does. Like at least for the next like hour, it did make you happy, right? But we've really been trying to listen to what people want to do career wise. And I think we're finally past like we have to reorganize, we have to do the thing, we have to figure out how to have a COVID unit. Like we're past all of that. And so now we can go back to focusing on each other. And so now we're back to thinking about personal and professional development, sending people to meetings. What type things do you need to find your career fulfilling? Having division retreats so we can talk about what your division does for the department and what you want to do going forward and what your needs and wants are. And I think that has been very nice because for a good year and a half, like you couldn't have those conversations because we were too busy putting out fires. And so we're finally at a point where we can talk about how to grow each other. And I think that has been more helpful than anything else.
And I think this is something that I continue to struggle with. So moving to an institution that was looking at an accreditation visit from the LCME, like it will be 2.5 years, but I haven't even been there 2 years yet. So I'm still trying to figure out the curriculum and everything about it. And so I have a team of people who are exhausted from just changing continuously, now looking at the Herculean task of actually preparing for accreditation. And so I think this is really a challenge. So we're doing some of the social things as well. Also trying to connect with the students in that way because there's been a huge disconnect in that. So just last week, I'm like, I am tired of these like staff meetings. They're a waste of time. We're going to do lunch once a month instead. The work can get done somewhere else because I do think it's the connection, trying to do some retreats and thinking about what's our mission and purpose and why did we want to do this and where do we sort of see ourselves going. And that's really been challenging to balance that strategic planning of looking towards the future, like where do we want to be 5 to 10 years from now, while also we have a lot of stuff that, you know, from the complete changes from previously, but we need to fix some things for accreditation and balancing that. I think some people are just really incredibly tired. And so having some individual and difficult conversations of how can we reimagine, because you're clearly exhausted in this role, how do we actually reimagine your job and how can you do something different that might bring you joy, that you're just tired of doing some of the same things for a really long period of time? And those are hard conversations, but I think I've at least had a couple of successes of trying to completely re-envision the job. And so the same person, but within a completely different job has probably been helpful.
I think you had a question.
Vice Chair for President LIJ. Actually, my question was similar to the wellness question, so I'm going to pivot to a different question. Now that you mentioned medical students, and I think obviously, it was a big impact on emergency medicine with the match and having so much more unmatched spots than I think ever before. It was very impactful to how people were feeling in our own department, and I think that's multifactorial. Post-COVID, COVID affected it. So now that kind of this has happened, I think people are nervous, like what are the applicants that we're going to get? I think applicants are probably worried about wellness and schedule and what happened during COVID. How are each of your programs going to work to address this gap? What do we need to do to get the best, to fill, get the best recruits?
So how are we all approaching getting ready for next year's match?
So I think after not this year's match, but the previous match, we already knew we had a problem. Like I don't know if everybody's aware, but we had a lot of open spots that we didn't have before the previous year. So given what had happened already, we should have known this was going to occur. So coming into this interview season, I actually obliterated anything that might look like a cutoff. Like if it looked like something that would just throw you out immediately, I just got rid of it. Everybody's stuff got rid. Didn't matter where you went to school, didn't matter when you went to school, didn't matter if you'd already trained somewhere. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on holistic review, and I think we're all at a point where we're really going to have, I know we talked about it, but we're really going to have to do it now in emergency medicine and really think about what is it from people's previous careers that make them great ED doctors. And test scores and things have never really correlated with who makes a great doctor, right? We know that. So I think from what we're getting into the specialty, I'm not so worried about that. What I'm actually more worried about is how to educate the people who didn't have the education that we're used to folks having during the pandemic. I have an intern who's never done a pelvic exam till she was a resident. And so how do you kind of teach the skills that we thought should have already been taught that really aren't in our curriculum, right? Because we presume that you already have that. So trying to make sure that we cover the basics during orientation, like super basics, I think was a bigger surprise to me than having to figure out the recruitment stuff. The recruitment stuff is going to be what it is. Like, I think we're going to have to get comfortable with the SOAP. I think we're going to have to learn things we didn't learn previously. I was in the SOAP this year. I will cop to the fact that I didn't 100% understand how the SOAP worked until the week of the SOAP, despite the fact that I actually attended the webinars and stuff on how the SOAP works. But I think that like we're all going to have to be open-minded, and we're all going to have to reinvigorate how we do orientation to bring everybody to the same level, because since we're going to have to be in the SOAP more, I think, as a specialty, making sure that the people who were not planning to do emergency medicine now have the same skill set that the ones who have done their away rotations and spent extra time in the ED, we need them all to be at the same level. So I think our focus needs to not only be on recruitment, but on how to bring everybody together and up to the same speed.
Yeah, I think we have to take the dirtiness of the SOAP away, because I think it's going to be a reality for programs intermittently over the next couple of years. We had this discussion with my program director. We unfortunately didn't fill 2 years in a row, but got at least the first year, we got a very strong candidate, probably is one of our top interns right now, who switched from a different specialty, and the one coming from the SOAP seems to be of that same caliber. So we're looking forward to that. But I think a couple of our strategies are, that net has to be cast very wide now. I don't think people could sit back and say, we filled off our top 35 for the last 5 years, and darn, I'm only going to rank 40 people, and I'm going to get my top 35 again. I think that all that stuff is going to be blown out of the water, and we're looking at how to get, rank list that goes down to 120, 150, whatever we need to increase the chances just because of the pool. And I'm kind of the same mindset that if you want them, put them on your rank list. Like, there should be no real cutoffs. Like, unless there's something really egregious during that interview process, or something gets uncovered during the process, or in the, when you're reviewing the application, I think everybody should have a fair shot, because I think we were able to fall on that, 254 board score, definitely want them. 230, maybe not the best candidate, I'll put them lower down. And they've never mattered, right? So that's what our strategy is going to be moving forward for this year. And I had the double whammy that we had a brand new program director who had a very successful first year, and then got hit with these 2 back-to-back misses. And really, you want to talk something that knocks you for a loop and that. So there's been a lot of, working with him, counseling him on it. It's not his fault. Kind of thing. So I think that's a big change as well, to have to move into somebody who's, new into a role, both myself and he, and then have to go through this whole process with them.
So I think we have not had to recruit. I mean, people came to emergency medicine before, and I've really had to shift my frame of focus of thinking about that with a student who, had the lower sort of board scores, and going, oh, you need a parallel plan, to saying, oh, no, I've got to reshift and reframe how I think about this. But I think we as a specialty really need to think long and hard about how do we build the pipeline of people who are interested. So this is really an opportunity for us as emergency medicine physicians to think about what are our obligations to our academic institution, how do we get involved and teach in the preclinical curriculum more heavily, so that the students are able to see the things and the great things that we're able to accomplish. And I think we have to be incredibly cautious not to be our own worst enemies in this. We are so problem focused that it is, I know all the times that we've sat around and talked about the frustrations with boarding and the frustrations with administration or other pieces of this that you perceive as being the barriers to what you're really trying to do, which is provide phenomenal patient care, but the student doesn't see it that way. They see it as this specialty is broken and they can't get along with people. And so while we are really focused on solving problems and want to contribute to that success, I think all the learners see is, ooh, they're unhappy, they're dissatisfied, they can't, they don't play well in the sandbox with others, as opposed to seeing us as I think the leaders that what we are is that we're there, we are the ones who are there 24/7, 365 days a year, taking care of patients, and we need to make sure that we're framing those conversations externally to our students so that they're seeing those as well. And I think also, now the pressure's on us to really think about EMIG and things that just happened naturally for us in the past couple of decades too.
We have been extremely fortunate as an institution to continue to be able to recruit great students as well as great residents without not filling, and we know that we're just fortunate. It's interesting because in 2020, the senior residents who never before had difficulty finding jobs had a lot of difficulty. They were doing lots of per diems, piecemealing things together, and that had never happened before, and it really put fear into the lower classes. But the fact is that it's bounced back, and certainly the workforce report that was released had a huge impact on how everything is viewed. And I don't know if you're as familiar, but the AHRQ report saying that we misdiagnosed everyone in the emergency department. We are the number 3 leading cause of death in the country, also impacted people. So from an organizational standpoint, when we were looking at this through SAEM, there's so much emphasis now. We have a task force dedicated to this, the scope of practice, how it can expand, and what are we going to be in 20 years as a specialty? And are we going to be needing more emergency physicians to go out into the community and do other things on top of what we already do? So it's not necessarily doom and gloom, and I completely agree, Luan. I struggle with, sometimes the faculty are complaining amongst themselves about things, but we have to curb what we say in the emergency department in front of the residents as well as the medical students so that they don't get this false idea that this is the worst specialty. And I want to tell them, no, it's still the most amazing specialty out there, and I love it, every day, so.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
So, Luan, going back to what you said about, faculty sort of doom and gloom in the ED, we're experiencing a lot of that, and we're struggling because, we've gone from in the pandemic from being ignored prior to being the heroes to now we've been putting up with crap for a long time, and we're still putting up with things with boarding and all those things and lack of nurses and all that. And now we're telling our faculty because of the workforce issues, you have to stop complaining in the ED. And I think if you pull them back to a strategic level, they sort of understand that, but it feels like you're telling them again, stop whining. And it's really difficult. There are some faculty that are really burned out that we still are expecting to work more hours, to do more things that nurses used to do because we don't have nurses, to support the residents and they're all nervous about their jobs. How do you do that? How do you do that without, on one hand, saying, stop whining, just grow up and stop whining, and at the same time, recognizing and admitting that there's a lot of turbulence for faculty. And then at the same time, we're saying, no, we're out of the pandemic, now you have to go back and do all the scholarly things that you sort of ignored for 2 years if you want to get promoted again.
So I don't know that I have all the answers, and I don't know that I'm even saying stop whining as much as be cautious of who you're whining to and around, and having that the same situational awareness that we have for every monitor that goes off, that we can change and listen to things. We need to be equally as aware of it as who is around us and what their perceptions are. And I think this really actually holds true for a lot of things we do in emergency medicine, that sometimes we are perceived as because the junior learners are not working with us and haven't experienced the frustrations and doesn't understand that this is the 10th time that this individual has been in to see us this week for their inability to get patient care, or they're only hearing the one end of the phone call where the consultant is being really nasty, but you hang it down and you hang the phone up and you have a lot to say about it. And so I think we just need to be cautious about how to create those safe spaces so that people do have a chance to vent about them, but also being cognizant of what is the perception to those around us. And so having a conversation with your colleague in a separate space or stepping around the corner to have that, I think is very different than having a tirade at the nurse's station about it, if that makes sense. And other people may have better ideas, but I think it's also how do we create forums that people can have their voices heard, and then we get meaningful change out of those so that we're not just, expressing frustration, but that we're able to see forward movement and really try to make sure that we're calculating and sharing those small wins along the way, because I think that actually helps all of us remember why it is that we're doing it, that we do make progress, that it may be slower than what we appreciate, but that we are moving forward with it.
I would agree a lot on the messaging about that. I think our specialty is perhaps more sensitive than others are to the notion of toxic positivity, and will shut down immediately with that. And that sometimes comes out of leadership in the hospital, depending on what specialty is up there or who is sort of driving that down. And that's dangerous for us. But there are a number of concrete wins. So we start our weekly faculty meeting huddle. We've kept a pandemic practice of we have a virtual meeting once a week instead of a big, long faculty meeting. Attendance is better. We record it. We send it out. But we start every week with the wins. What have people in this department succeeded this week? Patient satisfaction by name. The resident faculty who got it, we share it by name. We share it multiple times because it takes a solid 3 times hearing something to have that land with you, to have you recognize, yes, that's true, that's real. The papers accepted, how the course review went, how many people are presenting at a meeting. Anything that is concrete and positive. The other thing that we've done whenever possible is try to solicit that from others outside. When the hospital president, vice president, or chief medical officer, who does sometimes view the ED as difficult when you speak up about the problems, sends a compliment, it goes a long way. It goes a real long way when they acknowledge that. So I try to recruit that whenever possible. Can I get somebody else to acknowledge the positive things that are happening here? Because there is that day-to-day just fatigue of the message from everybody in the ED. Oh, please keep going. Please, we don't want to know how bad your boarding is because we can't fix it, and we don't want to acknowledge that we can't fix it. Well, what can you acknowledge? Can you acknowledge that we did X, Y, or Z today well? And I think the other thing that is really helpful for some of this faculty, not all of them, but some of them, is consistently sharing what's happening behind the scenes that you can't see, that is real. One of the things we've been sharing a lot lately, we're boarding a lot of behavioral health patients, I'm sure you all are boarding that, but our hospital leadership and attorneys have recently taken legal action against 2 county DSS agencies. You would not know that if you're a rank and file faculty member, but you're the one sitting there looking at that patient who's violent, aggressive, and abusive, and let me tell you, this vice president signed off on this litigant, go in and we filed a case in a court of law, and at least continue. I think it's a lot of, we didn't talk as much about communication, but it's a lot of energy into let me help you see something is happening, to kind of shift that metric in your mind. But I think it's going to take us years. I don't know what you guys do, but I think it's going to take us years for some of those to recover. Yeah.
I was just going to mention that our CEO has a weekly newsletter, and when we push messages to him and we say, hey, this is really great, our emergency department would like to recognize this award or this award. And I think it's okay to vent, but it has to be in an enclosed setting. And, what happens here within this room shouldn't be in the room. But it's okay to vent, and it's okay to support those who I know are struggling too.
No. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you for attending, and thank you to our panel.